I want to take you guys back to October of last year, October of 2010. It was a period where I had ignited this big promotional campaign. I was, launching this literary series that I tapped the DuPont Circle. I had images and flyers and posters and things on my website, on via both my Facebook pages, Twitter. I did a big video about it. You guys saw the cast. I spoke candidly about the plot structure and everything. And this went on for about 3-4 weeks, and then I released the first chapter of the series via a new website that I had built on October the 26th of 2010. And the first chapter received very, very mixed reviews. There were those of you who really loved it, who enjoyed it, who liked it. And there were those who, for the very first time in my 3-year platform, had really stepped up to criticize my work. They were very vocal about it, very, sharp and abrupt and abrasive with their opinions regarding not so much the content, but the presentation. Grammar and punctuation and just little tidbits. And to be 100% honest with you, it wasn't the criticism that bothered me in the sense of what people thought. It was more so the fact that I had to own the fact that I released work prematurely. I knew when I released the DuPont Circle that it wasn't 100% ready for public consumption, but I had gotten to the point then that I was so frustrated with having to get up every day at 7:30, 8 o'clock and post stories about Beyonce and Britney Spears and Chris Brown and Sierra on the red carpet, and I was posting about celebrities all day long on my website, to garner in traffic so I could collect a Google check. I was, able to throw in, photos and stories that were more personal to me or that were geared more towards my LGBT audience, but at the same time, it was really beginning to drain my spirit. And at that point in my life, I felt like the DuPont Circle was a great escape. It would allow me the opportunity to, still relate to my audience on a daily basis, but I didn't have to talk about celebrities to continue to receive, web impressions and unique views and things of that nature. I prayed on it because it had been a project at DuPont Circle, something that I was working on. I started that summer of 2010. But I honestly did not go through all of the proper channels as far as redrafting and having more than one person read the work. I had set this date for October the 26th. I had the photo shoot done, everything was set, and I was bound and determined that on that day I was going to stick with my promise, I was going to stick with the release date, and I was going to put the project out, and I did. And instead of me focusing on the positive feedback, I really did hone in on a lot of the negative commentary because, like I said, for the very first time in 3 years, I was really receiving heavy criticisms, and it was like a real wow moment for me. One that I took in stride, because I was used to being attacked because of my videos and things I would say, and I was used to being attacked, so it wasn't that, but it was the fact that I had to own the fact that I ignored a deeper voice, one that was telling me, Zim, this isn't ready, just for the sake of being able to put out something new, to put out new material. And as a result of that, honestly, I ran. I sort of did what some of our favorite music artists do when their album is released and their first week sales aren't really high, their first single tanks. I ran. I abandoned ship. I would receive not texts, but tweets and Facebook messages from you guys and YouTube messages and, emails like, what's going on with DuPont Circle? When is the second chapter being released? And I ignored them because I couldn't wrap myself around, at that time, owning the fact that something I presented, I felt like it had failed. And I went through November and December, and I started releasing like short stories to my website that you guys loved. I did a Christmas story, I did a mini story about two guys and, coming home from work and spending that time together. And I got, of course, great praise from that, and I was like, oh, this is great, because this is what I was used to, you know what I mean? And that was a comfortable space for me. And even though I knew I should have been putting that energy into continuing to develop the DuPont Circle and letting other writers and editors read my work, I just focused on what I knew would work, would sell for Zim and Zim VanAdams, and so I kept putting that out. And I told myself in January of 2011 that I would go back to the fundamentals of the DuPont Circle and release chapter 2 properly and chapter 3 and chapter 4. And then things started going wrong in my romantic life. Stuff that only really my friends know about, my mother and father know about, my sister knows about. I was in court. It was a mess. And I really fell into a funk. And I allowed the devil and his work to once again interfere with my plan to refocus on the DuPont Circle and release the work properly. I felt discouraged. I went through periods of just being to myself and quiet, trying to keep myself really ignorant to what was truly in my spirit, which was Zim, you need to pick yourself up out of this space you're in and tackle what the real issue is. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed to come before you guys and to admit that I had rushed my work, that I had made mistakes. I was embarrassed to admit that I was going through things in my romantic life, that I had allowed a guy, another man, to knock me off course. I was embarrassed. But what I had to own for myself was that this is all part of what I've prayed for in my life. Long before you all knew me, I prayed for a platform where I could use my writing, use my voice, use my presence to entertain and to enlighten other people. And as soon as I got my real first dosage of real criticism and then the wear and tear of relationship issues, I ran. Which is something that many of us tend to do in our lives when we pray for something and we ask for something and it's given to us. If then it's given to us and it doesn't come packaged perfectly or come packaged the way we expected it to, we sort of turn our backs and we run. It's like that grandchild that asks his grandmother, grandfather for a toy gun for Christmas. And that grandmother, grandfather doesn't feel comfortable buying their grandchild a toy gun. So instead, they buy their grandchild a book on gun safety and how to use a gun or what a gun can do to hurt and harm people. But on the last page of that book, that grandmother, that grandfather tapes a $100 bill, enough money to cover the price of that gun. And they give their child, that grandchild, that book on Christmas. And the grandchild excitedly unwraps it and sees that it's a book. And instead of reading it, they flip through a few pages. And then out of disappointment or frustration or anger, they toss the book aside. Not only missing the lesson that's in that book, but never receiving the prize at the end, the treasure, the $100 bill, the money enough to buy the toy gun that they wanted or asked the grandmother, grandfather for. And I use that as a lesson to show you guys, or to say that what God gives to us oftentimes does not come in the packaging that we absolutely expect it to. It always comes with a lesson. And sometimes we're so bullheaded and so frustrated and so wrapped up in our own ego that we miss the lesson. And in missing the lesson, we also miss the treasure. It's the same thing I did when I prayed and I asked God 3 years ago to give me the opportunity to move to California, to start or to continue my life doing something I really wanted to do. And He opened every door possible for me to get there. And as soon as my life got financially difficult and I started to struggle and things got tough for me, I called home and asked my parents to deposit a certain amount of money in my account, and I said, I'm coming back to Baltimore. Another instance where when things got tough for me and I was no longer in a comfort zone, I ran. I have to look at myself now, especially because of where I'm going and what's being presented to me. I have to look at myself and I have to challenge myself, as I've spent this year doing, challenging myself to sticking in situations when I'm facing a new trial or new tribulation. I challenge myself now to, when one thing goes wrong, to make a plan B, and then a plan C, and then a plan D to work things out. And only once I've exhausted all possibilities do I throw my hands up and honestly look at myself in the mirror and say, God, I've done everything I possibly can do. This must not be what you want from me. So now I turn and I try something else. As a final gift to you all, I want to share a prayer that I use and that I say when things get rough for me. I pray. I ask God to give me the strength to lean into the discomfort and to help me trust the process. In your lives, when you pray and ask Him to guide you, to present you with an opportunity, to present you with a new job, a new relationship, a new home, when you ask Him to help heal you through health crises, to help bring your family back together, whatever it is, when He presents it to you, even if it doesn't look the way you think it's supposed to look, or it doesn't feel the way you think it's supposed to feel, when you hit that first obstacle, you pray to Him and you ask Him to give you the strength to lean into the discomfort of the situation and to help you trust the process. When people say it gets better, that's only partially true. The older we get, the tougher life gets. The tougher the challenges, the harder the barriers, the more intricate the obstacles. And you have to be strong enough to rise to the occasion, to face all of it. It doesn't get better, it gets harder. But through every phase of the journey He has you traveling, He's teaching you a lesson to help you deal with everything you're going to face, with every challenge, every obstacle, every demon, every individual who will focus on your weaknesses because they are afraid and intimidated by your strengths. As I step away from this platform, and I know what God has in store not only for me but for you as well, I leave you with this question. When everything you've asked for is laid before you, or even you've been presented with struggles that you never expected you'd have to face, will you rise to the occasion? Or will you run? For the last time here, I am VanAdams, conquering the world. One word at a time.